provide perks to your employees that are on side. And again, all like is CRA and IRS, they have all this laid out. But if you don't think about it, you don't ask your accountant, then you might be missing really key things. And again, I think of like some, listener, if you've got a yacht, if you've got a massive motorhome, if you've got, recreation properties, those are all things that I think could be useful. And again,
Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have a very special guest on today. Most of you guys are really scaling your business, taking it to the next level. However, though, you probably are sitting there going, okay, well, now we're taking dividends and we're making some money. Wonderful. What do I do with it? How do I allocate it? Having those conversations maybe with your spouse, maybe with your business partner, etc. And maybe there's also different ways of helping you streamline your own business operationally, structurally, to ensure that you're really scaling to the next level. That's the reason why we have this next guest on. He is the CEO and founder of his own wealth management, Serviss Wealth Management. Now, basically what he does, and he likes to put it in this way, and I like how he positioned it. He said, basically, he's a quarterback for you and your spouse and your business partner to help you achieve that goal faster and quicker and collapsing that time frame. And he helps you make those decisions so much easier through education and through really just streamlining it. Now, I could tell you his designation, certified financial planner, chartered life underwriter, chartered investment manager, certified health specialist. And if you have no idea what any of that meant, well, that's the reason why you need to listen to this next guest and probably share this with probably a colleague, maybe your team, and maybe your spouse. Please welcome my next guest, business advisor, wealth scientist, and the CEO of Serviss Wealth Management, my friend, Dustin Serviss. How you doing today, Dustin?
I'm good, Christian. Thank you. It is so in Celsius, about minus 12 outside, so I'm happy I am inside, heat's on, and looking forward to this podcast.
Well, hey, man, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because like we were just talking a little bit offline, you really help businesses, really before they exit, before they have that kind of, liquidation, whatever it may be. And that's what a lot of our listeners are. They're like, they want to scale to 8, 9 figure and they want to have a clean exit, but really how to structure their business and their situation properly before and prior to that exit. But before we dive into all that fun stuff, which was going to be diving in here shortly, Justin, I want to ask you, what's your passion, man? What's the thing that drives you, that keeps you going to add value to these entrepreneurs and these business owners that are hitting their head against the wall sometimes every day of their life, but you are going out there and helping them in any way capacity? What's that passion, man?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was permission. I think, listener, if you are a person who strives for great things and always are trying to research the best, tips, hacks, you're listening right now. So it just shows where you're at. And I think as entrepreneurs, we get our blinders on, or we get so focused on the task at hand, which is success, which is building, which is, we're trying to do all the right things. We're achievers. So my passion right now lies in helping people get the permission to put the pool in, take the trip, the permission to live the life that you want, and sort of shed the chains or shed the shackles, whatever you want to call it, of I've been working like this for 20 years. I thought a long time ago I was supposed to work like this for 20 years, and this is how I'm going to work for the next 20 years. And so there's an analogy of two people that are clients that I've changed the names, but I use hardworking, successful guy. He works hard, reinvests, everything back into his business, sacrifices evenings, weekends, misses the odd thing with his family. And what he has done at age 60 is he sells his business for $3 million. You have Maria, on the other hand, who, values time off, values reinvestment in courses, values time with her friends, values spending, and understands how to spend. And she only sells her business at age 60 for $1.5 million. Now, the punchline is at age 63, they both pass away with money in the bank. And I often see this with clients when we work with them to say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you are 65 years old. You have 4.9 million or 6.9 million in the bank. You only spend 150,000 a year. You're going to pass away with money even if we get a 0% return. And they'll say, okay, well, what's that mean? Well, you're going to pay a lot of tax. So why don't we start spending more? Oh, no. We don't want to. That's not how we got here. So why would we spend more? Okay, well, why don't we give more to the kids now? No, we don't want to, screw them up because we don't want to make them entitled. Even though the kids are, 45 years old. But So then the question really becomes, could you have worked less in your earlier years? Could you have not worked 7 days a week, built your business, your net worth up, or your investments up, and only had a couple million? Because that would have been enough to get you through to the finish line if you would have had your same behaviors. And I take that and try and relay that back to the younger generation in saying, like, success and money, and again, whether people like it or not, it does open doors. So it doesn't necessarily make you happy, or you can't buy the happiness like the famous cliche is, but it does open doors. So if we're aware of how hard do we need to work, okay, well, how hard is that? I was ingrained that I took, it was never anything my father said to me. It was how I interpreted as a child and then parlayed it into being older. But it's like, I don't know how to work hard. I know how to work hard. I don't know how hard. So I'm just going to work permanently effing hard. I'm just going to work so hard that it's just going to be successful. But then at some point, family, children, epiphanies, and then you start looking at people that you think are your mentors, or I have recently, I'm 41, is who do I believe is wealthy? I know lots of rich people, but who do I really believe is wealthy? And then why do I think that they're wealthy? So that is a very long-winded intro, but hopefully you got some jumping off points there.
So Dustin, when you're saying kind of wealthy, is that holistic wealth? Like wealth and relationships, wealth and spiritual wealth, and monetization. Explain that a little bit further. I like that. Paradigm.
And everyone, can define wealth different. We have a podcast show called The Picture of Wealth, because what we materialize in our head kind of defines how we act, choices we make, decisions we make. So that you nailed a few of them. Wealth can be different things to different people, but when I look at really wealthy people, and again, this is my interpretation. Listener, you can imagine your own thing, but I think of someone who's able to balance being driven and successful in business. There's no listener, if you're an entrepreneur, we're on the same page. Nothing beats that sort of drive, getting an inspiration from something, laying down a goal, laying out a strategy, executing the strategy, and then seeing it work and being handsomely rewarded for that. Nothing beats that. I had a paper route when I was 8. All I wanted to do was sell that 1 or 2 people that weren't on my route, just to get them. Golf course, it was cleaning golf clubs and carts, getting tips, cleaning the clubs just a little bit better, scrub the grips, even though that wasn't part of our job description. Just that as an entrepreneur feels really good. So how do you balance that? How do you balance, your children? Again, as a father, that's important to me. For if you don't have a child, then that can be off your list. But then, and I'm not a huge, I'd say we volunteer, but I don't feel like I'm at the age yet where I have that much extra time to really be putting a huge amount into, huge commitments. I sit on a couple boards, and so I try and contribute where I can to steer the community where we're going. And we do a charity event every year, which is ours. So that's our contribution. I feel like I could be better in that bucket. I just don't know where the time. You'd have to just make the time. So right now I'm kind of leaning into that. And again, my kids are younger, 5 and 7. So there's a busy life by design in that regard. So what is wealth? Health. If you can't take care of yourself in your mind and in your body, how the hell are you going to take care of anybody else? So that's super important. Fitness, mind nourishment, when the podcast you listen to, the food that you put in your body. And so what do we got? Fitness, family, finances. I don't know. Those could be the 3 summaries of wealth.
Now, you mentioned something. I want to loop back in on this because I had a mentor that said the same thing. We strive for this money, more money, more money, more money. And then when you actually get there, like you mentioned, I love what you said, where you're like 64, 65, and then you're like, well, I'll still have money. Like, you'll be fine financially. Yeah, maybe some money and, millions of dollars. But it's like, then you look back at your life and say, well, did I really need to sacrifice all that I sacrificed? For what purpose, right? And so getting clear on that. So Dustin, I'm curious, with the individuals that you work with and help with, right? A lot of business owners that are really scaling. Do you help them kind of really clarify and say, hey, you know what, why are we doing this? Where, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different vehicles, a lot of different strategies, and that's all fun, but what's the goal? And getting clear on that, and then reverse engineering and say, well, if you want 10 million, cool. Well, you don't have to work as hard, because with this strategy, where we're going to go, you're going to get 10 million, in your nest egg, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is a gentleman that I coached on Fridays off. So Fridays off is something that I've had for or done deliberately for about 3 or 4 years, and doesn't mean I'm not accessible. I'm always accessible for my staff via cell phone. But this particular gentleman was, I need more balance. I'm working 6 days a week. I don't, but I can't take the time off. Like, I need to work. And so that usually in my study is like, those are goals that we've set, probably when we're 18, 19, 20, 22. And, once 20 years goes by, life is very different, but you carry that baggage ahead and you continue to act the way as if you're still 20 because you got that goal, where the finances are different. Your maturity is different. Your efficiency is different. Your connections are more rich, and you can get things quicker. So, yes, I think of the first thing that comes to mind is a tool we built called the spending accelerator. And the spending accelerator isn't necessarily, it has to do with money. It does, but it is a tool to look at very quickly and say, can I maybe bump up the salaries of some of my key people so that I can take a Friday off? Can I reduce the savings? So again, this is a story of my wife and I. I built this tool for myself, and then I started to use it with clients. And what we did was lay out, okay, I'll in the sake of time, I'll just try to shorten it. So there's a machine in your basement, and there's a door. Every first of the month, the little door opens, and there's a conveyor belt that comes out. And that conveyor belt, say, puts $20,000 on the conveyor belt, and it is riding along. So $20,000, that is basically what you can save in a month, or that's the amount of money that's for you. Again, we could get really into the weeds about tax and whatever, but just imagine with me. So $20,000 comes along. We need to send out $10,000 a month to spend on our mortgage payment and our car payment and groceries. So $10,000 gets kicked off the conveyor belt and falls in a bucket called BAM. That's your bare ass minimum, BAM. Those are the minimum expenses that you need to sort of function. So we got $10,000 still going down the conveyor belt. We're going to kick off some into an emergency savings. We're going to kick off some into a real estate, savings bucket. We're going to kick off some into, call it core investment. You could like ETFs, dividend stocks, whatever you like. It's something that's not blow up worthy, but pretty steady Eddie, but gets decent growth. Then you've got a high risk bucket. That can be your penny stocks and your crypto, a little bit less, so putting less into that bucket. Then you're going to put your core and then your real estate. So you're putting less into that bucket because you want to put enough that if something bumps, it's going to be enough money that you like feel good about it, but it's going to be not enough money that if you go to zero and you lose all your money, it doesn't cripple your family. So small into that. If you do this right, the spending accelerator, there should be a bucket or a bit of money coming out off the end of the conveyor belt. And that is for you to spend. That is intentional spending. Spending on, again, upgrading your house, maybe finish your basement, fancy or whatever. Like, if your goal is to host more, then upgrade maybe your sound system in your house. Like, I'm using material stuff. But then on the bigger picture, for business owners, that extra money could be, okay, I'm going to save $3,000 or $4,000 less a month. But what am I going to do with that? I'm going to spend this money and I'm going to hire my own assistant. That person's going to follow me around. I don't care if they pick their nose all day. But some days when I need them, they're going to be the leverage to help me have more freedom and flexibility in my life. It could be, giving 2 managers in your organization a $2,000 or a $1,000 a month raise. And back to the example person I talked about, the Fridays off. One of the objections he had for me was, if I take Fridays off, my guys won't respect me. And this guy's a very, very trustworthy, respected business guy. And I said to him, listen, if you explain it properly, say, I'm going to give you managers a raise, and knowing in your head, you're like, oh, I'm going to save less. But the spending accelerator has shown me at 55, 60, that's still lots of money on my net worth, even if I'm saving that less money. So I'm going to upgrade these guys' wage. I'm going to save less, but it's still enough. So now you've got the optics to feel comfortable. Okay, well, if I just, kind of carried on like I'm doing, I'm going to be okay. Service has showed me. I'm going to upgrade my managers, but I'm going to tell them, I am upgrading your wage because I'm giving you more responsibility so that I can take Fridays and I can intentionally be creative with the direction of the business. I'm burnt out. It's not going to last. And if we don't get this under control, then none of this will exist for anybody. And that, again, is what got rolled out with him.
Well, that's a really great example. And I'm curious, did you see that business scale even more so? Or did it just really, steady and stay steady? Because what I've noticed sometimes is when you get the owner out of the way, the individuals actually take responsibility and really start growing the business even higher. I'm just curious what you saw when he started taking Friday off. You just mentioned obviously a lot of the infrastructure in order to obviously establish that, and I'm a big believer in that. But I'm just curious, what did the result look like?
Yeah, so the result was he tried it for a few months and has reneged back to being there, not working weekends, but he is working his Fridays, even though he's not supposed to. But the power came out of the conversation when he brought forth to the one main manager. So trying to be confidential. So brought one manager up to a general manager and moved one kind of sub manager up one level. And then they hired somebody. So they kind of moved everyone up. But the morale in the office got better. The morale there was a latent thing with the guy that got promoted to general manager. He almost wasn't entitled, but he thought he could do a better job if he was in that role. And it didn't kind of come out until he got sort of promoted and they got talking. And so, in every business, there is underlying current in the staff that you think you know about, but you might not. And so that it worked out for the best. And that timing worked out well because it moved that person up. Now that person, that was a year and a half ago, that person is in talks to potentially be owner material. And so they're just sort of working out how, that might happen.
Yeah, I'm a big believer, Dustin, in regards to like building constraints in your business, because when you do, get clear and say, you know what, I only work XYZ. And it may not be like you may be actively on the field in the office working. You may be thinking maybe different ways, like thinking larger, macro picture, where my business is going, the vision behind it, the collaboration, strategic partner. So it's not like, work is in the office sometimes. But my point is building the constraint, you start really kind of delegating and building systems around it to ensure that the business keeps going. So I love that approach. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the different strategies. You've worked with numerous businesses, all different industries, all across the spectrum in regards to revenue-based, top line, and so forth. Dustin, when you're having these conversations, some of the listeners that are, first-time founders, right? And so this is the first time where they're actually bringing they get a pretty decent-sized paycheck, right? It's like they're taking some dividends. And then they're also looking at their business and it's like, okay, we got some really, we got a nice runway. But maybe there's a lot of things that they may or may not be aware of, right? Certain things that they should be asking themselves. What are you noticing, Dustin, that maybe these individuals should, have this conversation? And I'm talking about like healthcare or like just, culturally or, building out different systems and processes or maybe like, I've, in the US, there's set plans, all different, retirement plans for your employees, et cetera, right? That could be very advantageous for that business owner at this stage that they may or may not be aware of. So I'd love to get your response in that regard.
Yeah. So the couple of things that popped into my mind were risk management is for sure something. We deal with a lot of partners. So there seems to be a niche that so business partners approach us and they'll say, hey, we need some help. So what usually it's like, we'll look at the risk and say, okay, well, first risk is, let's say both partners are female and they're married to men. So let's just say, okay, do you want to be partners with that person's husband? And the one partner will say, well, no, he does not really into the business, and I don't really want to be partners with him. Okay, and we'll ask the other person, do you want to be partners with that person's husband? No, not really. And so what risk have we taken? Well, we have a shareholder agreement that says, okay, we will sell our shares. If one of us dies, we're going to sell our shares. Okay, that's great. How are you going to pay for those shares? So then you say, okay, well, we would get a loan. Okay, that's an option. We could use savings, savings from the business. We could pay out that, surviving spouse over time. Or a fourth option would be, well, what about a term life insurance policy? So a term life insurance policy, for a couple million on a 40-year-old might be a couple $100 a month. It's probably less. So it's like, okay, well, that would be a lot cheaper than financing, $2 million to pay out. And that would be easier on cash flow. So there's a whole, again, I don't want to get into the weeds, but you could do the whole metrics and you can let a person decide. So that would be, one reason. The second thing that we see in business is on the same vein of risk management. Like, what if someone gets disabled? Oh, well, some of my close clients are siblings, two brothers, and they run a business. And so the conversation with them is, well, if you get hurt, what's the plan? Well, I would probably, our business kind of runs, and that'd be fine. Like, I'll just keep paying him his salary. And so it's like, well, okay, so salary and dividends, and you've got a missing gap in the business. You've got a hole there that person contributes effort. Now, the punchline with this one was, after like a year, you'll keep paying the salary. Like, would you pay for 2 years? Like, what if it's a long-term disability or, cancer or something? Well, that 2 years, I don't know. And it took me to get both the husbands and their wives together in the same meeting, and to get the wives on board, where they were saying, well, why wouldn't you just buy that person out? And so now all of a sudden you've got this, like, they both work hard already. So, and the wives both know that they work very hard. So all of a sudden you're going to take one out of the equation who's at home. And these guys are hard workers, so it's not like they'd be purposely doing it. But one's at home, and he's resting, still getting dividends and paycheck, while the other one is doing double time. And the value of the business is a growth business, so the value is going up. So again, these are the conversations that people often just go, oh, we're just hard charging, and what do we need? Well, there are solutions to solve those problems, and lots of solutions, and talk to a qualified insurance person about that. So that would be number one. And then we kind of touched on it before, but the other thing I think is retention of staff provides leverage to the owner. So owner founder, you've seen, if you've hired one person, that leverage that they gave they. So if you can hire more people or you can keep them, then there's leverage there. And I think of in Canada we call them like RSP, or call it a pension plan, or just something where you are putting money in a bank account for an employee. It's giving you a tax break, and it's giving them kind of a sense of long-term stability. Then you've got benefits. We coach lots of business owners on something called whisper strategies. So these are not and again, talk to your accountant before you do any of these, full disclosure. So these would be like, let's say you own a rental condo at a ski hill, and maybe you could take your staff to this rental condo, and maybe you can write that off. Maybe you could rent, so your company could rent your ski condo off of you person. And again, I don't know US, but in Canada, talk to your accountant, and the US. But maybe there's ways that you could actually provide perks to your employees that are on site. And again, all like is CRA and IRS, they have all this laid out. But if you don't think about it, you don't ask your accountant, then you might be missing really key things. And again, I think of like some, listener, if you've got a yacht, if you've got a massive motor home, if you've got, recreation properties, those are all things that I think could be useful. And again, this is getting maybe too creative, but private membership at golf course, to get someone in, do you have to pay to get that person in? Conferences, sending, I had a great boss. One of my first bosses, said, if you can write a half paragraph on Word document about why a course is going to benefit you at our firm, I'll pay for it. And so again, my first career was civil engineering, but I loved stocks and I loved marketing. And so I would go to night school. And so every couple, 4 months, every semester, I would write a one, half page, and I would say it'd be better with clients. And, this stock course is going to better understand our company and, the metrics of, it was a bunch of BS, really. But I tried to make it as applicable, and he always paid. And I never forget him for that because, we have a bit of a thing for our staff. It's X amount of dollars based on how long you've been there. But if you can prove to me how it's going to benefit and that course, because again, back to Maria, I talked about people that invest in learning. I think my best clients that are older, say north of 80, these people are, whether they play pickleball or I manage their money, but they still follow the stocks. They know all the stocks that our money managers have. And we have engaging conversations about them. They put them in their phone, not to trade them, but more just to keep up to date with the highlights. They read things. Their friends are into that sort of stuff. So they're really sort of training their mind to not shut off. I see that in society where it's like 60 or 65, I'm retired. And that's sort of the end. It's like, no, it's not the end. People are living way longer. And so, all being engaged, it does help keep you healthier.
Yeah, Dustin, you mentioned some really, really solid things. One, and I love what you went right into the risk side of things, because I think that's a conversation a lot of, Main Street businesses, and even when they're scaling to 8-figure, they don't have that kind of, what's the next step? What happens in case? And nobody likes to think that way, realistically, but you have to, and have that conversation, have to have that dialogue. I want to get your response on this, Dustin. So let's say, for example, and I've had this conversation with someone, I want to get your perspective on it, where you've got a nice run rate, you've got some money coming in, you're scaling, and you have an option. You could put in some benefits, or you could give everybody a raise, but with kind of the extra capital. And would you recommend, because again, you see like comparatively, well, we got tax, incentives for putting in certain benefits, et cetera, depending upon what that looks like, but also just giving a raise, it simplifies, and maybe even just getting a poll of from your employees and say, well, what do you guys want? Because we can structure however. What do you recommend in regards to that? I know it's very contextual, but I just want to get your perspective on it.
I think it doesn't have to be set in stone. I think of my own, and again, this is just my own personal experience. So listener, if you've got something different, that's totally cool. But it doesn't have to be, my own example. So I talked to you about the spending accelerator. I built it for my family and my wife and I. For about 3-4 years, I was set on a certain number going into all these buckets. Again, I took engineering. I'm a bit literal, kind of like bucket kind of person. So I had all this money going in, and I had it set up so that the business was, so again, we're again, like some of your viewers, we're a smaller firm, but we'll say almost 7 figures, 1 staff and me. So you can kind of, and we work fairly remote, so you can kind of do the math. But again, right now, in the last 3 months, I've totally flip-flopped it. So we used to be saving a lot, investing, paying off debt, and sort of have all these things for our bucket. I now have reduced those buckets because I see I'm still doing my regular, monthly, or I actually do weekly, like deposits into 4 different investment buckets. So those are still happening on a reduced level. So I can hold back more in the business to really put a growth push on. And why now? It's, this is kind of my second chapter, or, second quarter. It's like 20 to 40 is the first one. 40 to 60 is going to be my second quarter. So that reward hadn't happened for me yet until I was about 40 and started looking at my one staff member, brought on another staff member, keen. It's like, there's something bigger here than just me saving. There's something bigger that, again, we could build something that younger people getting into the finance space is very hard, unless you want to go work at a Wells Fargo or work in a bank and kind of cut your teeth. But, since 2006, I've been independent. So I didn't start at a bank. I didn't have clients. It is a grind. It was a grind then. I can only imagine now what you'd be faced with, especially if you're going to be in the high net worth space and focus on that. You're calling people. It's like they already got people. What do you really know? All those things. So now I think we could build this better. We could give great opportunity to younger people. So I've pared down my own investment saving. I'm pouring it into the business. I think once people sort of lay out kind of, again, I use the conveyor belt. And you don't even have to do it that sophisticated. Just write on a piece of paper and just kind of see where's my kind of interest. Because that's gonna pull you through, letting go of, someone today, or I did just this morning. That's not fun. But in a growth mode, we're giving people new roles. There's mistakes that pop up. There's things that, but it's growth, and it just is very exciting. Could also be my children's age. My 5-year-old, 7-year-old, they're into their own kind of thing. We're not at baby stage sleepless nights anymore. So again, it's, check in on the spending accelerator. Yep. When I'm 55, 65, 70, the other piece that we haven't talked about yet that I think is important on this topic is not ever retiring. And I know that's not maybe possible for some roles, or if you're a dentist, we work with lots of dentists, their bodies just can't, that's just stressful. So unless you kind of start right from the start going 3 days a week, it's hard on your body. So maybe you can't, but it doesn't mean you have to stop. In a dentist example, it's like they make great income. So maybe you buy a different business and go active in that business. Maybe buy real estate and be active, be the manager. So if you're kind of building your life or building your intention around, I want longevity, then you don't actually have to save as much, which means you could spend more while you're alive. And that could mean give more to your kids while you're alive. Real estate, I know in the States, maybe not in some states, but in our Western Canadian sort of area, the average house price, I don't remember exactly what it is, but in our hometown, the town is only 220,000 people, and the average price is like 1 million. So I don't know how a 22-year-old buys their first house, how even a 27-year-old, you go to university. So parents are going to be helping their kids. That is going to be a reality. So maybe if you had the optics to, I can take 200 out of this plan and help them buy a house or a condo. That's, again, I'm rambling, but I think I'm getting what you wanted there.
No, it's a very, very solid point. And that's why I think it's good to have this conversation and the perspectives, right? And the paradigm and the questions that these individuals should be asking themselves in regards to the risk, but also exiting and having that conversation and even the structure of it. And that's what I find so interesting. And that's what I love about this. I want to get your perspective on when you're really scaling. We talk about the business. I want to kind of go into more of the personal side here. A lot of individuals are not familiar with certain, and I know the Canada and US, their tax policies are tremendously different. So I don't want to dive into too much of it in micro level because I know it's very contextual depending upon what nation you're from. But I really want to talk about certain like top tier strategic approaches that a lot of these business owners are not familiar with. And I'm talking about after they take a dividend, because I've seen where there's and definitely in the U.S. there's a difference between taking a salary at a base plus dividends and taking some pull off from that because it's taxed differently. I'm curious, is it the same and for Canada? And if so, what do you tell your clients in regards to how to approach it? Maybe decreasing that salary and then increasing the dividends, et cetera, because obviously we kind of, it's very contextual. So I just want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. And again, I'm not an accountant, but my sort of observation would be there is a balance between making sure you have some salary and some dividends. Dividends tend to be taxed a little bit better. And again, every business is different too. So you have different businesses that collect different revenue streams that would affect that. So up in Canada, the reality is you want some salary so that you, again, pay into CPP and the government sort of pots so that those are intact. And again, that's a whole nother, whether those pots will be there when you retire and all that stuff. I get it. But you want to have some salary so you pay into those. And then you also are giving yourself a bit of an ability to get leverage. If you pay yourself always in dividends, it's very hard for a business owner, especially in the early years, to get financing because it looks like you make nothing. And from the bank standpoint, they're looking at, you could have this company that you sold one thing for and it was $300,000 and you had one transaction, and then you've just taken dividends out every year for like 5 years, even though you're not even working. So they want to know that you're working. So that's sort of the high level. Now, what I think you're kind of asking is, if you go back to kind of like the spending accelerator, if you think your operating business is, listener, your operating business is, it could be the ladder manufacturer, it could be the bakery, the dentist office. You have an operating business that generates revenue. You have some expenses in there. You pay yourself a salary out. If it's running optimally, there should be money left over at the end of the year. So up in Canada, the common strategy would be, if you don't have any sort of student lines of credit or personal debt that needs to be paid off fast, we would take that extra money that's left in the operating company, it would move it up to what's called a holding company. And once it's in the holding company, and again, if the structure is set up right, talk to an accountant, talk to a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, you get the structure right so you can move money from operating company to holding company. It's called an intercompany dividend. There's no tax. So now you've got this pot of money building in your holding company. So it keeps the operating company really clean, and you don't have a lot of extra fat and extra savings inside the operating company. On a tangent a bit, if you get sued, if you, I don't know, that's really the main thing, you keep it out of there. That you don't have your personal investment kind of stuff. You don't buy real estate in the operating company. You want to keep that totally separate. The second reason is, when you go to sell the operating company, you don't want the rental apartment that you and your wife bought. You don't want your stock and your crypto portfolios in the operating company. It's very messy to reorganize that. And in Canada, there's certain timelines. So you might, if you got someone knocking your door, hey, we want to buy your company, you might not have enough time to what they call purify. So purify that company. You might not have time. So then now it's quite messy. So if you do it right from the start, operating company stays nice and clean, keep some cash back to reinvest in that and whatever that is. But if there's extra, push it up to holdco. In the holding company, you then are going to make investments there. Because the more you can keep, and again, every scenario is different, but up in Canada, up until you sort of have about more than $1 million, making 5%, the tax rules are quite advantageous to the structure I'm talking about. So long story short, ask your accountant, hey, listen to this podcast. I don't know what this guy's talking about, but what should I do? That's every listener, do that. But in conceptual, in holdco, you'd have this pot of money sitting there. Then you're going to take that money inside that corporation and you're going to slide it into dividend stocks or ETFs. And then you're going to slide it into high risk bucket. Then you're going to buy some real estate, lend it out, so your holdco becomes sort of your own pension. It becomes the thing that when you sell the operating company, that's going to pay you continuously and also be passed to your children. Because if it's done really good, your operating company is sold, and hopefully you get some preferential tax treatment there. Some money will slide up to the holdco. Some money will likely slide to you personally, pay off your personal house debt, put it into investments in your personal name, or buy a rec property. And then the holding company is like this engine that every month just spits out money. If it, again, split it with you and your spouse, and that'll save tax. So again, we're talking 30,000 feet, but I think hopefully, listener, you've got a view of what we're up to.
Well, this is where it gets really fun when you do hit scale and you've got some resources and you got to think about the structure of a lot of this stuff, and you got to figure out where you're going to deploy this capital to be most effective in regards to. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what you mentioned, Dustin, at the beginning of this whole conversation is, getting clear on the end result. What do you look? How do you want to live, et cetera, and how do you want to structure this? Dustin, I want to ask in regards to when you're working with families. And where and I know this is very specific, but I have had some conversations from our audience about this, and I want to just talk to you about it, where there is, the son is going to take over the succession plan for the father, and what that looks like, what you recommend having that conversation. I know this is getting away from the wealth manager. This is getting a little bit more consulting, but I wanted to get your perspective on how to structure that, correctly. Again, just saying, hey, should that, father at some point have, a dividend kind of, decreasing, and at what point does it, put it into a something, another holdco? How to structure that properly? Again, that it comes down to legal and tax consultant, et cetera. But I just want to ask you what you recommend in that circumstance to have a really clean succession plan.
Yeah. Okay. So one of my mentors is a guy by the name of, I'll give him an unsponsored plug, but Tom Deans, and he wrote a book called Every Family's Business. And so, short 2 seconds on him. His family had a big manufacturing firm, and his dad was moving him up to CEO, and then he was going to take over the business. But that wasn't working. And so they designed 12 questions. So they designed this, I can't remember what they're called, 12 questions on the front of the book, but at the same time, they had a name for them. So once a year, they would go through, him and his dad, the 12 questions. Now the first, not even in the questions, for senior. So listener, if you are the founder or you are the leader, and you've got a son, a daughter, or someone coming into the business, and you think, it's my legacy to just pass this on. I want them to have the same life that I have. I got yachts, I got Ferraris, or whatever your thing is. I want them to have my program. The first question would be, what is actually your intention? So your intention, if you actually distill it, is you want to give them money, freedom. You don't necessarily want to give them a business that they might not even have any interest in. Again, not right now, it probably doesn't feel like it, but if you started the business again, or if you remember those days when you started it and when you got into business, how much of a grind and how hard it was, that you had the passion to push through. Children don't necessarily have that. Some do, and especially kids that have started in the business really young and worked their whole way, and they just, you can tell. But a lot of times, we don't have alignment. And so when you look at that, the better thing for that particular individual would do is just sell the business for a lot of money, set up trusts, buy life insurance, and just flow money to the children that way. And not give them the business that comes with, it might come with money, but it comes with a ton of responsibility. So I think that having those conversations first and foremost, and ripping the Band-Aid off the whole secrecy. I see it not so much, my parents are kind of starting to come around, but only maybe it's because I'm older now, but how secret the stuff is. It's like, no one can know what my stuff is. And don't tell anybody about your stuff. Don't ever talk openly about your own finances. It's like, keep it locked up. I have a copy of my will at my office, and I don't care. I'll show you my will and show you what it says. And I think having that, my kids are too young, but if you've got kids that are able and are, older than some age but are mature, there's no sooner time than to start talking about, here's what's going to happen. And, some of my clients, we've progressed. So when their kids were like 17, they would sit in on meetings that I had with them, and we would talk about certain pieces. So there's this, there's that. We talk about the business. We wouldn't talk about numbers in front of the kids. Now, and I'm thinking one specific family, those kids are now like 27, 28. We sit at the kitchen table, and it's all on the table. All the numbers, all the amounts, all the income, there's trusts, so now it isn't a secret. It hasn't happened overnight, but it's very transparent. Here's what happens if mom passed away. Here's what happens if dad passed away. Here's where all the money, here are all the key players. Again, I'm the quarterback in that particular file, so they know call me if something happens, we'll sort everything out. But if I'm gone and we're on a trip together and all three of us are gone, like, who are the key players? And that comes, we use something called the financial dashboard, which is a 1 page of all their pieces. And some of them get challenging to fit onto 1 page. But again, I have an engineering background. I love drawings. I don't like long reports. And often clients say, this is the best tool I've ever seen because, some examples are, my wife has no idea, or my spouse has no idea. My husband has no idea where any of our stuff is. He just knows how much he can spend a month. This now shows, here's all the parts. If something happens, here's where we start. The idea was born out of one client where I read his will. He just updated it. I read it and I thought, holy man, that took me like 2 cups of coffee and 3 hours to try and figure out. And there was 7 pages in the middle of it where there was various trusts in various scenarios, because you got blended family, 1 generation down. And so I asked him, how did your wife do reading this? And he said, I don't think she even, I said, I'm going to draw this. So I drew all 7 scenarios of if this happened, that happened. And he said, oh, thank you so much. And he goes, I put it in with there. She understands at least the pictures. A trust is a triangle and a company is a square. And so then I thought, well, I wonder how many other clients, they know the stuff they have, but they don't know how it's connected. They don't know how to, for one, have a once a year conversation around it. It's for 2 partners to sit down and say, okay, where's this? My wife and I do all the time, because stuff is evolving, changing. There's stuff sells. We buy things. Numbers change. People change. Key people change. It's like, okay, here it is. Is there any updates? Oh, I didn't know that was that, or I didn't know that was there. Okay, well, now we do. And so it becomes a great conversation piece. And again, spouses and money is a very interesting 3-way, that the more communication that is more efficient, more constructive and engaging, I think the better off everyone's overall wealth will be.
I'm so glad we went this way, Dustin. I'm so glad you just, kind of shared that situation, taking something that's very complicated and over convoluted and making it simple and putting it even on a one sheet where it's like, here's a little picture and this is where the money's going to flow. This is where it's going to be at. I'm a big believer in that. In fact, it's interesting, you don't realize how much is in your head or the owner's head or that founder's head until you come to that where, someone like yourself, Dustin, where you're like, wait a minute, where are you getting this information? Where's this paperwork at? What's going on in this circumstance? Whatever. And there's like, I didn't know I had to write all this down and put it into a situation where if, worst case situation, I've heard, and it was so sad. I had a friend of mine, I shouldn't say a friend, it was a friend of mine that I was a colleague, etc. And he mentioned where this individual, 40 years old, had incredible business, running a top line, eight figures, mid 8 figures. It was a construction business, and he just something happened at the work site. He passed away. It was a terrible situation, and the whole thing was, then the wife had to step up. She had no idea how to run it, and obviously there was a lot of turmoil, and lost a lot of revenue. Went down all the way. They got it back to scale. But it was so sad to see where it dropped down to like, high 7 figures. But I mean, that's a lot of, from mid 8 figures to, high 7 figure. I mean, that's still quite a bit of income drop, definitely when you're used to living at a different lifestyle. But anyway, so Dustin, I see this all the time. And I'm so glad you just kind of really emphasize that and having these conversations with your clients. For those that want to learn, a little bit more of your strategic approach, right? Simplifying it and really just, that holistic 30,000-foot view, but also that very micro, minuscule kind of pinpoint strategy. For those that want to learn a little bit more, Dustin, how do they reach out to you and be part of what you got going on, man?
Sure. So servisswealth.com. It's SERVISS wealth.com. We have a podcast called The Picture of Wealth, which is on all the major platforms. And I'm on all the social media for Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram.
Awesome. And Dustin, again, I really appreciate you being on here, man, and just sharing these circumstances and these situations that you've helped your clients go through. I mean, either business structure or just, personal household structure and kind of, what that looks like and how to think about it and those questions they should be asking. And guys, those links are in the description below. So make sure you stop what you're doing and reach out. He's got an incredible podcast. I would highly recommend it. I'll put his LinkedIn, his website as well. So make sure you consume his content there. Dustin, I always love to ask my guests before I let you go, is there any last words of wisdom they'd like to share with our audience?
No, I think I would just be curious, listener, if you're looking to be better and looking for an edge, what is your wealth edge? And this is your ability to, go into investment situations or, I use the example of a realtor is, probably better than me at finding real estate at a deal. So again, we're looking for lower risk situations, to, acquire wealth at a lower risk. A carpenter would be a great person to be flipping houses. Again, for a business owner, your wealth edge is probably your ability to earn an income. And, lots of studies coming out now on side hustle is, why not just put it into your normal hustle? So again, reinvest back in your business. And I look forward to seeing you in the next podcast, Christian.
Well said. Well said. Guys, that is the founder of Serviss Wealth Management, my friend, Dustin T. Serviss. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.